Oh. All right. Welcome, everyone, to NAMI Washington's OSPI Candidate Forum on Youth Behavioral Health. My name is Anna Nepomuceno, Public Policy Director for NAMI Washington. I want to thank you all for joining us tonight. At this time, out of respect for the candidates and the youth, I ask the audience to please keep your cameras off and your speakers muted. Thank you to the candidates for participating, and a big thank you to all the youth who've come together to organize this candidate forum. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our host from Inglemoor High School, Tanvi Arakapudi.
Thank you so much, Anna, and hello everyone and happy Thursday evening. My name is Tanvi Arakapudi, and I'll be your host for the evening. Joining me today to ask questions to the candidates are Peyton Lee Bold and from Kingston High School and Aditi Kotanor from Issaquah High School. And now I'd like to introduce our candidates, Chris Rakedahl and David Olson. Thank you, Mr. Rakedahl and Mr. Olson, for participating in our forum. We're so happy to have you all joining us today. And before we get started, we have some important ground rules to start off with. The first one is each candidate will have 3 minutes to answer each question and an opportunity to respond to your opponent's answer. Rebuttals are limited to 30 seconds. Earlier, we did a coin toss to determine candidates' order of taking the first question and making closing statements. There will be no opening statements. Time limits on responses will be strictly observed. A timekeeper will hold cards visible to the speaker indicating how much time remains. And when the stop card is shown, the speaker must end their speech within 10 seconds. Alyssa Chin will be holding the cards and she'll be waving to you so you can see that just right. For the last 30 minutes of this forum, we'll be taking questions from the youth in the room. If you are youth under the age of 21 in the audience, please submit your questions in the chat anytime and we'll monitor it. Please be sure to add your name and what school you're from as well. Let's get started. Our first set of questions is about social and emotional learning at public schools.
This question is from Urja Varadkar from Eastlake High School. We received a lot of questions from youth who strongly support social and emotional learning in schools. How do you propose to expand the implementation of SEL programs to ensure they are available in all schools across the state? And how can the OSPI work with local school districts in developing and implementing SEL curriculum taught in schools?
Mr. Rakedahl, please answer the question.
Great. Thanks, everyone. It's really good to be here. Thank you for hosting this. To Anna and to all of our student leaders, thank you, and good luck on your school year. I think some of you are just getting started, most of you after the break here, so it's great to have you give up your time in a complicated time for you. Again, I'm Chris Rakedahl, Superintendent of Public Schools, State of Washington. Thank you for this great question. Social emotional learning is a very, very powerful complement to traditional academic instruction. We've known this in the research for a long time. Ironically, there are people who still fight it, and they say that's not the role of schools, and I disagree with that. So while I've been at OSPI, with the help of our legislature, who's been fantastic on this issue, they've invested dollars. We've actually built learning standards around this. So when you think about math, everyone knows there's a sequence to math. You really need to know numbers before you can add. You need to add before you subtract. You need to multiply before you divide. There's an age-appropriate sequence to math, as there is language. You got to know sounds before you can do words, and words make sentences, and so on. And it's the same thing with social emotional learning. So these are really powerful standards that begin to build on each other. It might be as simple as learning to keep your hands to yourself when you're a kid. Or there's a lot of great lesson planning in early elementary grades around really identifying your emotions and calming yourself, or getting a partner to do that. So there's really incredible instruction that when we implement it with fidelity, in other words, We do the professional learning so that districts know those standards, that teachers get support in those standards, and they complement their instructional delivery. It's important to learn math and science and art and all the rest, but it's also a barrier if students have significant behavioral health challenges that often start by not having some really simple techniques to help themselves along the way. SEL, of course, as it evolves, is also about being really respectful to your peers. It's about understanding your place in the context of other learners. And if we do this well and keep building it out, it's a very, very powerful way to not only improve behavioral health and student mental health, but also academic success. So what's next? Continuing the professional learning. If there's one thing we struggle with in this state is we've got 70,000 certificated teachers, and it's hard for them to do the professional learning on all the things that have been asked of them. They're trying to get better in their own content area. They're trying to get better on social emotional learning. They're trying to get better on behavior supports. They're getting better on suicide awareness. They're being asked a whole lot around student safety. We've never put more on the plates of teachers and paraeducators than today. So I would say what's next is for all of us to take those powerful standards, work with the legislature to do the real professional development support. That costs a lot of money, $50 to $60 million a year to give everybody in our schools even 4 or 5 hours of support in this work. So got the great standards. We got to build them out so they're consistent and really invest in our educators. And the last thing I'll say is our students play such a big role in this. It's not about them just sitting there and getting instruction. It's also about them being very interactive in the learning as well. And obviously that's very powerful. So thanks for the great question.
Mr. Olson?
Yeah, thank you. I will agree. I think one of the key issues here is the fidelity piece, and to make sure that we're implementing social and emotional learning in an age-appropriate way. Because one of the things that I've been on the school board in my school district for 11 years, and one of the things that, not all children come into, for instance, kindergarten ready to start school. Not all children are fortunate enough to go to a preschool that teaches them how to behave, how to interact with other students without, maybe hitting them, or little kids maybe biting, to be able to be respectful of each other and to their teachers. And so one of the things that we need to make sure is that we're doing that work with age-appropriate development. So making sure our youngest learners are getting it in one way. Well, that was a fast 2 minutes, and all the way up. And so I agree with Chris that teachers do have a lot on their plate. And when I've talked to teachers around the state, they say that not all the students show up, especially high school students. We need to make sure that students feel welcome during those discussions about SEL, because some of the questions are hard and they may not feel comfortable answering them. And so I think that the number one important thing that we need to do there is to implement it with fidelity. As Chris said, there is legislation out there and there is curriculum built around this, and that teachers are open to teaching it. I support it, but I just want to make sure that we're doing it. I agree 100% with fidelity, and that we're doing it to focus on each individual grade level, like elementary, middle school, and high school. Each one's a little bit different. And I agree also, we need to make sure we're giving the teachers support, the professional development, so that they're doing it correctly. So thank you.
Mr. Rakedal, do you have a response?
I'll only add that this is why I think we also spend a lot of time focusing on diversity, equity, and inclusion, because there's an element to this that's about culturally responsive support for kids. Based on culture, based on faith, based on gender, based on lots of characteristics, SEL can look a little different. One person's volume might sound like anger, and to somebody else, it's part of their culture or their proximity physically to each other. There are communities and cultures that do a lot of proximity and a lot more touch, and others who really want a bigger gap here. So part of it also is just really respecting the diversity of our kids and our communities, which means you got to train educators to be culturally responsive. It's not a one-size-fits-all with SEL. It's really community-based, it's school-based, it's down to the individual child as well.
Mr. Olson?
Yeah, one of the things too is that, our school board, and there are school boards across the state, and I applaud them for it. We have student representatives from each of our high school. We have junior, senior from all three of our high schools that serve on our school board. And so they go out and they meet with their student body, and we have student advisories with our school superintendent that meet routinely with our students. And so we appreciate the feedback that Student Voice brings back to our school board so that we know where we might need to make adjustments in that area. And hearing directly back from students is super powerful. And like people might understand that they think I have a cold, but I really have damaged vocal cords from being in the military for 28 years. So being able to know, individual issues like that's important, so that maybe even to eliminate bullying in high school or be in the school. So thank you.
Your time's up. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry. Thank you.
This next question is from me, Aditi. The current SEL and mental health education curriculum are pretty outdated and they don't really resonate with today's youth. In my school especially, I can see that SEL lessons are kind of considered like a joke and they're never taken seriously by the students. What's your plan for updating the mental health curriculum in schools? In what ways would you involve students in the design and evaluation of SEL and mental health programs?
Mr. Olson, please answer the question.
Yeah, thank you. That was a good question. It sort of goes back to what I was saying a little while ago, that the teachers that I've talked to that have to, it's part of their week, they have to teach SEL to their students. And one of the problems we're facing in our schools across the state right now is absenteeism. And the teachers report back to me that exactly what you said, they're not taking it serious. Oftentimes, half the kids don't show up for the SEL training, especially at the high school level. And so I think that to include not just state legislatures or maybe members at OSPI that might be writing the SEL curriculum, but I think we also need to make sure that we're hearing from our teachers, but absolutely including students, such as our student reps, going out in our student body and asking them, what would you like to see this curriculum look like, so they get some ownership in the development of it. So it's always nice, a lot of us in the business world don't like it when people in the top 2 or 3 people in a corporation make the rules and push it down to the lower deck plate people and not really paying attention to how they feel or how they're going to react to those decisions. So being able to be proactive in the development of that curriculum and include student voice to help develop it will make it more current. As you said, they're a little bit outdated. So if you're bringing in new voice and new student voice, when you put it together, it'll be more relevant, so that whenever the students are asked to participate, they'll feel they have buy-in, and it'll be more realistic to their world as they live in it today.
Mr. Rigdal?
Yeah, I really like this question because it's an opportunity to talk about how our state frames all of this. At OSPI, as a superintendent and our team, our job is state learning standards, right? So in this case, social emotional learning standards by grade level. What should kindergartners be able to do and know and express and demonstrate? What should 4th graders know, 8th graders? Local school districts adopt curriculum. That is the job of school boards. It's a hard job. Mr. Olson's done that hard work for 11 years. We have 1,500 school board members out there across the state representing nearly 300 schools, and each community is going to be a little bit different, which is why they have to adopt their curriculum that's consistent with their community. OSPI doesn't write curriculum. And then teachers deliver lesson plans. And I use that term broadly, teacher, because in the case of SEL and mental health supports, when it's integrated really well in classrooms, particularly in K-5 classrooms, and I'd say even middle school, I think students almost don't know what's happening if it's done really effectively. It's hard to do, but good contemporary curriculums can do that. I think where we get into a little bit of trouble is when some folks say, hey, that isn't my job as the math teacher or the social studies teacher, like have the counselor come in during advisory or doing some other kind of pull-out program or specialist program. And then the students feel like it's kind of isolated. Well, I'm walking down to get 30 minutes from a counselor on this, and they don't necessarily see the connection in the classroom. Those can be good models when they're done with fidelity, but they aren't always taken seriously by students. And so I'd say we want to integrate as much as possible in gen ed settings, general education classroom settings. It really is key to do that professional learning for all teachers, not just those who have specialty in this. And then, as David said, everybody in a community should be involved in the curriculum adoption, including students. There's really good stuff that's very relevant to them and it's contemporary for them. And honestly, sometimes it's a little edgier because it gets right to that point of student mental health and suicide awareness and bystander training. It can be more controversial. And I think when you exclude students from that, pretty traditional adults say, well, that's too hot to touch. We didn't do that when we were in school 30 years ago. Why do we need to do it today? And students would say, you really need to do that today because the world has really changed. How we interact with each other in person, the language we use, the way we interact in our gaming platforms and our social media, students are just interacting differently, which calls for different engagement. And you can't know that in a curriculum adoption unless students are at the table. At the district level, yes, but maybe even at the building level, because it's going to be different in elementary than middle than high. So invest well, focus on the district adoption of curriculum so it's consistent with the community, and totally engage parents, families, and students in the work. And then obviously commit to it for a long period of time. You don't always see the results right away, but you got to commit to it for a long period of time. And the last thing I'll say is peer-to-peer is really powerful. You never learn something as powerful as when you have to teach it. So when we have small groups of students working with each other, what we call tier 2 supports oftentimes, those can be just as powerful as an expert teacher or counselor coming in and delivering it. So get students involved in the actual teaching of it as well.
Mr. Olson, do you have a response?
Sure. I think I would push back a little bit. The state legislature does oftentimes task OSPI with the development of a curriculum. And when a school district wants to bring in a new curriculum, it has to be approved by OSPI. So there is some interaction between schools locally adopting a curriculum on this, but also they do have to go oftentimes through OSPI to get approval of the curriculum to make sure that it meets the state standard. And then, we just had our welcome back for our teachers yesterday, and we had our building champions for social and emotional learning. Did I get muted?
No. Yeah, your time is up.
Oh, okay, sorry. I'll do better.
Mr. Rigdal?
Nothing more to add except that not only does the local district have to align to our learning standards, otherwise you have communities that can go in a lot of different directions that can often be harmful. So that's part of the fidelity, but also we have a sensitivity and bias review process as well. So if you're adopting a curriculum from, let's say, a state that's really not too keen on SEL, you can't bring that in if it's got explicit bias to it, if it's harmful or impactful to kids disproportionately. So there's reasons we look, but ultimately school boards adopt their own curriculum.
Perfect. We will now move on to questions regarding academic stress and student experience.
This question is from me, Peyton. Multiple schools, including mine, have seen counselors understaffed and unable to keep up with all students' mental health, as well as a lack of resources educating on mental illnesses. What strategies would you implement to increase the number of mental health counselors in schools, and what specific actions would you take to improve suicide awareness and prevention education?
Mr. Rigdal, please answer the question.
Well, thank you. As somebody married to a lifelong school counselor, this is very near and dear to my heart. My spouse got into this work after starting her career in the classroom because she saw an opportunity to complement instructional delivery with great counseling supports. The first thing I'll say is let's be super aware of how much pressure there is on counselors, because they're still the traditional model of counselors being schedulers. So they're building master schedules, they're helping kids get what they need, they're academically advising students. And then in the last 20 years or so, just this massive load of student mental health needs have hit them. And in a lot of districts, they don't have specialists. So a lot of times a counselor wants to do the frontline work and then say, I think what we need here is a specialist, a school psych, a licensed therapist, or even a community-based support. So those linkages are really, really important. In recognizing that, we partner with the legislature. Again, amazing work by our legislature. They invested in the last couple of years over $300 million on an annualized basis to add a lot more counselors, nurses, school psychs, social workers, which are very, very critical in this work, licensed mental health therapists. And then for districts that are really rural and remote, a lot of times they can't find those people. So they do regional models with their regional educational service district, which we've helped out with, or they'll even do telemedicine and telemental health. So we've given them options based on where they are, but it is about investment. I don't think we can ever stop here, though, because you also can't compete. Just because we get more counselors or school psychs, it probably means a community-based provider just lost their person. So I keep saying that the way to put the linchpin in this is to continue the investments, but to really challenge our higher ed institutions with financial incentive to say, yeah, you need lots of computer scientists and engineers, and those are critical people. But the public good needs more teachers and special education providers and school psychs and nurses and mental health specialists. So we have to compensate them well to get them. But a lot of young people don't even want to think about those careers at the risk of not getting compensated well or having opportunities. So I'd like to see us push into this space of creating an incentive for our higher ed institutions to attract and retain more people who want to go into those fields. Somebody who's been in industry is great, but they don't always know the developmental processes of young people. When you go in to be a school psych, a school nurse, or somebody working as a support system for a kid, you've made a real commitment, which means your background and your pre-service comes with a lot of child development and a lot of child mental health supports. And so that's really key for us. We also built out regional mental health networks during the pandemic. I did it with federal emergency money. The legislature backfilled some of it with permanent state money. This year, we'll be asking them to permanently build out those regional models so that when students just know they need help and support and we identify it, we can't provide it at the school, we also have to have teams in our communities and our regions that can help out as well. So that's just a little dose of where we've been and where we're going.
Mr. Olson?
Well, I agree. That's a great question. And I'd say the number one issue that is hurting us in that area is that the state is absolutely doing a horrible job at fully funding special education. The current prototypical funding model for schools across the state doesn't make any sense. So for my school district of about 9,000 students, we only qualified for one psychologist for our schools. I've talked to other school superintendents across the state, and they don't have any because they can't afford to pay them. As Chris said, it's sometimes hard to get someone with those credentials into a rural school district. But for our school district, we only are eligible for one, but we use our local levy money to hire an additional 12 psychologists, not counselors, but psychologists, because we know how important student mental health is. So, because teachers, as we already said, have a lot on their plate. Teachers are not mental health counselors. We want to give them some professional development to help identify students that might be suffering from early signs of mental health.
Candidates for OSPI for this.
We ask everybody, the audience, to please mute. Sorry about that. We'll give you your time back.
Okay, thank you. Thanks. So what I was saying is I just think that the state really needs to do a better job of funding special ed so that like my son is a school teacher, and I tried to say, hey, maybe have you ever thought about going to special education? He's like, I love special ed, but it's a hard job, and you can't get everybody to sign up because it takes a special person to devote a career to special education. But these teachers, because we have inclusive classrooms now where we have special service students, we have students with IEPs, we have highly capable, we have regular students, teachers are having to juggle multiple types of students in their class, and they're not always fully trained to identify students that might be struggling with various mental health issues. And to have a specially trained paraeducator in their classroom, because we had the right state funding to help with that, would go a long way. But also to change the funding model so that school districts could hire more psychologists and counselors on staff. And if they're too remote, the fact that we have the ESDs that are set up to help with those services, either through telemed or to provide some remote services for students. I think if you combine it, We also have third parties that we hire to join us that help students that are suffering from addiction.
You're at time.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Rakedal, do you have a response?
Well, a couple things real fast. Like, let's not confuse the messages that we heard there a little bit. There are 15% of our students who have individualized education programming and planning. So we have students with disabilities that need support. It is not fair to assume that students with disabilities have emotional mental health needs, nor is it fair to say that the 84% of our kids who do not have an IEP don't need those supports. So this question of mental health and behavioral health is really for all students. The only last thing I'll say here is we also should work hard on reducing the stressors that are causing this. This world of high stakes testing, high pressure courses, taking away electives from kids has been harmful, and we're working on that.
Time. Yeah.
Mr. Olson?
Nothing, I'm nothing to add, thanks. Nothing to add. Can you hear me?
The next question is from me, Aditi. What initiatives would you introduce to support students struggling with academic stress and the pressures of college applications? At my school, I can see that most of the students receive support from the counselors and the assistant principals, but what about that group of high achieving students? Because I don't see any support for them. How do you propose balancing the workload demands of homework and projects with giving students a chance to de-stress and recharge?
Mr. Olson, please answer the question.
It's a interesting question you have there. I serve on a nonprofit board, and we have a thing called Students to Distinction, and we interview students, in our school district that have been nominated for this award. And I often sit on the academic one, and I interview these students that have 4.0 GPAs, and they're taking a dozen AP classes, and they're in multiple sports and doing community work. And I often ask them, how do they find time to just take a break? And there is so much academic rigor for some of these students who are trying to get into elite universities. I would like to see them get some support or encouragement, maybe to try and take a break every now and then for their own to de-stress. But there are oftentimes, I think we need to work with parents with those children, because oftentimes they might be so pressed to try and get into one of these elite universities that they can't possibly make a B because there's so much stress on that. And I think that we need to be, that goes sort of back to counseling, to be able to have those counselors on staff that can talk to those students about how to de-stress, de-escalate just a little bit, to wind down a little bit, because that puts so much pressure on themselves. But there could be also things at home going on where parents are putting pressure on them, or even peer pressure, as Chris said a minute ago, peer-to-peer pressure. And so I think that could go to, I don't know, you have to applaud them for seeking such high standards for themselves, but I think we need to be able to encourage them to every now and then just take a breath and slow down and just try and look at the mountain, if you will. I know that's sort of that's a very tough question, and oftentimes a lot of it is just, I think we need to have counselors and teachers encourage them to take a step back and not put so much pressure on themselves.
Mr. Rakedal?
Yeah, this is a very complicated question in 2 minutes. So I'll start with this. Our higher ed institutions are doing a better job, not the best job yet, but they're working awfully hard to try to create what's called guaranteed admissions in a lot of the institutions. I'd like to see this more systemic. And the reason I say that is students should meet academic standards at the confidence in knowing that they're getting in, as opposed to this absolute competition of, I need a 0 period band, I need to add that 4th credit of math, I need 4th credit of science, I better get into pre-calc, I better have 3 AP classes. The pressure of competition is awful. And I say that very sincerely, because when did we decide that learning was some sort of competition and only some people would get access to it? And I know we've got elite institutions, and I understand that, and there's a market for that. But our public institutions in Washington State have capacity. They're very, very good. And we should be talking about guaranteed admissions processes that say, students, when you meet these benchmarks, you're in. and then we're going to figure out how to support you, as opposed to you may never get in unless you do all the right things. It is creating an untenable situation for kids. In addition to, I got to have my essay, I better be an athlete, I better be on the debate team, I better have extracurricular stuff, I better do volunteer work. We're over prescribing for kids. The second thing I'll say is, I came in with a deep passion that any student who is ready for college level work in high school should have the opportunity no matter where they live. College in the high school, AP, Running Start, Cambridge, IB, whatever it is. And there should not be a pressure to pay for that out of your pocket. If you took that calc class in high school, we'd never charge you for your book. The second we're giving you college credit for it as a Running Start student, suddenly we're charging you $200 or $300. That is a pressure on families. It's untenable. So we finally got rid of all fees for college and the high school. We now want to move into getting rid of all fees for Running Start. The dream here is that anyone who can get as much college credit as they choose can do it in a comfortable setting in their high school, either directly from their high school teacher who's qualified in college and high school, or go to their community college if they have access. Simply getting those credits and guaranteeing that they'll transfer to the next level, which is part of the program. If they guarantee the credit transfers and they won't add credit on the back end of a bachelor's degree, that's a powerful way to lower stress for families and lower stress for students. They already know they're doing college level work. They already know they'd had guaranteed admissions. They would know that their credit comes with them. And maybe they didn't feel like they had to be in 3 sports, 2 activities, 1,000 volunteer hours in every AP class that they can find. We should tell students that learning is a continuum, not a competition where only few people get through the gate.
Mr. Olson, do you have a response?
I just piggyback on what I already said. I think kids that are putting that kind of pressure on themselves, because it seems there has been a competition to get into these higher ed institutions, and forcing these kids to take on such a burden that they're going to burn out shortly after they get out of high school. And we had a forum a couple weeks ago where we agreed that we believe the state should pay for the students that can't afford to pay for the tests to get into these special programs. I think we should do more to take that financial burden off the students and the families who can't afford it. And so I think we're moving in the right direction on that. So that's all I have.
Mr. Rigdal?
I think no child, no student, no family should pay for any courses while they're students in high school. If you're accelerating, we shouldn't punish you or put filters on it to say, we'll only pay for the fees or books of low-income families. Every family, you are guaranteed a basic ed in this state. And until you graduate from high school, the state should pay for that. And if those are accelerated courses and college level courses, we should pay for those. So I would not limit this to low income students. I believe every student who wants to accelerate should get it done with us paying universal basic education dollars to get that done.
This question is from students from Sammamish, Washington. Throughout Washington, what do you think causes students the most stress and mental health problems? And are there any current policies put in place to help students manage their mental health? Additionally, what are the challenges that have come up, and what are your solutions to help students manage their mental health?
Mr. Rigdal, please answer the question.
Yeah, we provide a healthy youth survey in this state. We do this every 2 years. It's a partnership with the Department of Health and some other agencies to try to gather a lot of information. So we ask students this question, and we've got a tremendous response from that gives us pretty high confidence, because students tell us what causes the stressors in their life. It won't surprise people, but maybe the magnitude changes over time. Academic stress is very real. I'd say it comes up with more prevalence across income demographics than anything else. There's a stress about going to school, especially in this day and age. There's a stress about homework and all that goes with that. There's some stress around high stakes tests are not performing well enough. And so we want to continue to get rid of this, the high stakes test as the grad requirement, and just open up course-based pathways. But there's also things that have also been in our history, which is there's a lot of family stressors. There's still peer pressures around substance use. While a lot of that's going down, which is great, it's still prevalent. And then I think what's new is you all are a generation of young people, the first generation to kind of go your entire duration in a public school setting with a smart device, where 90% or more of you have it. It is constantly feeding you stressors. It's with you all the time. It is reminding you all the time of every global crisis. You're the first generation who's known every global crisis in video the second it happens. The rest of us maybe caught it on the news, or maybe it was a week later, or maybe it was in a monthly publication, or maybe as kids, we never saw it because we went on our bikes after school and we played until the sun went down. I mean, genuinely, you all are in a very different space. And so not only are we trying to work on this question of supports when students need help, but we want to get on the front end of this by being the first state in the country to really adopt comprehensive learning standards around social media, misinformation, and disinformation. We can take one of the most powerful stressors off of kids' plates by starting to intentionally step into the space of teaching them around how these devices are both good, but also deeply impactful to them. We never imagined that this stuff would take over so ubiquitously. We just couldn't imagine 20 years ago virtually all of the companies that are dominating the 6 hours of screen time kids get a day didn't even exist 20 years ago. So it isn't as if we can point fingers. That's not the point here. It's that the world is changing much faster than most institutions can respond to it, and we're doing something about it. So additional counselors, nurses, mental health, school psychs, regional mental health programs, making sure that districts all have a plan to limit cell phone use in the classroom, and then going the next step of making sure that our learning standards finally teach students the impact of these devices and doing it in a very intentional way every year that they're in school. I think that's how we lower the stressors the most. And then we'll keep asking students through that survey, massive scale survey, so that we have accurate data to tell us whether we're making progress or not, which we are, just need to make a whole lot more.
Mr. Olson?
Yeah, thank you. In my 11 years on the school board, the Healthy Youth Survey, time and again, that the almost always looks the same. And, in our school district, we're looking to have not just rely everything off of that survey, but have more like student check-ins where we meet with the student body, not our ASB, but with members of student bodies and do check-ins to ask them, how are you feeling today? Not just, after we wait to hear the results back from that survey. I would say the absolute number one reason kids are having mental health, anxiety, stress, depression in school today is their smart devices and social media, especially middle school girls. And, when I was in a forum a couple months ago, I mentioned a book by Jonathan Haidt called The Anxious Generation, and the amount of damage that smartphones and social media are doing to our youth, especially young children. And our school district a year ago was one of the leaders in the state that we restricted cell phones in our classroom and we blocked social media at the router. So the kids can keep their cell phones on, but in their backpack. They can check it at lunch if they want, but they don't have access to social media at all during the day, even on their school issued devices. At first, there was a little bit of pushback. The first day or two that a student is off their phone, there's a little bit of withdrawal, just like alcohol or drug. But after a couple of days, they accepted it. And when I'm walking through the cafeterias now, I see students that are talking to each other and engaged rather than on their phone, even during lunch. I had a parent email our school board a couple of days ago and thank us because her son's student mental health and anxiety has gotten so much better in the years since we eliminated cell phones and social media. That's the absolute number one driver. And I think that all school districts across the state need to implement policies to restrict cell phone usage and ban social media during the school day.
Mr. Rigdal, do you have a response?
It's a start. It's just not sufficient enough. The school is one setting where students access social media and are on their devices. So this is really a question of classroom-based behavior and behavioral health. We want chins up and students interacting with each other and listening to their educators and engaging. So we're going to see a big impact from the guidance we just put out, which tasks all districts over the next year to update their classroom-based cell phone policies. It's not enough if students then go home, spend 5 or 6 hours on the same devices, getting into the same engagement. If they don't understand the power and the danger of these devices, that's why the learning standards and the instruction matters just as much as when they have the device.
Mr. Olson?
Yeah, I certainly wouldn't support having new curriculum around cell phones, but I think, each school district can implement the policy as they see fit. We use student voice, parent voice, and teacher voice in the implementation of our cell phone policy and social media. So we used inputs from all of our stakeholders in our schools to make sure that it was effective. And hopefully it is a first step. So when the students leave school, they may hold that phone aside even when they get home.
This next question is from students from Kenmore, Washington, and Wenatchee. What measures are in place to create a safe and inclusive learning environment for LGBTQ and BIPOC students? Is there a focus on incorporating LGBTQ+ and BIPOC history and experiences into the school curriculum?
Mr. Olson, please answer the question.
Can you repeat the second half of your question? I heard, I didn't catch the second half of your question.
Is there a focus on incorporating LGBTQ and BIPOC history and experiences into the school curriculum?
And so I'm a firm believer that every student, regarding race, gender, ethnicity, whatever they should have a safe place to learn and feel safe and welcome in school. And I think that is a culture that involves everyone in school, staff, teachers, students. And, we need to make sure that we're having that goes sort of hand in hand with the social and emotional piece to be able to have students talk to each other. I think to have a welcome environment. I think the easiest way to say that is every student should feel welcome and safe when they walk into school, no matter what. There should be policies in place. All schools should have policies. We do that say no one will be harassed, intimidated, bullied based on anything, whether it's a race, gender, ethnicity, anything. They should feel safe in school. I know that there's curriculum being developed currently that haven't been pushed into down into the schools yet. That's going to be talking about some of those histories. The curriculum, most school districts now, as Chris said before, screen curriculum to make sure that there's no bias, to make sure that the curriculum is inclusive, and make sure that everyone, every culture, every gender, every ideology is incorporated, so they feel welcome and feel like they're being heard in these curriculum, and to make sure that the curriculums are screened, to make sure there is no kind of external bias written into those curriculums. So I think making sure that they feel safe, it's a school culture, and listen to student voice. And that's why we have student check-ins, and we have various BIPOC student organizations in our schools that we talk to and see how things are going with them. And I would encourage school districts across the state to have various student unions based on their gender ideology, color, or whatever, so that they can come together and know that their voice is heard, and echo that up to the staff and the school board.
Mr. Rigdal?
Yeah, thank you. This is really critical. We know that our LGBTQI plus students experience mental health distress at a much higher rate, suicide consideration at a higher rate, and ultimately suicide at a higher rate. So we can't beat around the bush and talk in generalities. We need gender inclusive curriculums. We need to make sure that every student sees themselves in the curriculum by race, by ethnicity, by sexual orientation, by gender identity. Families are very diverse as well, and they need to be able to see themselves. Students need to know love is love, and we need to support that, and then have enforcement mechanisms. And what I mean by that is if the curriculum is very inclusive, DEI is intentional, that we're integrating that in content areas that are appropriate and reasonable, as most of them are, then students get a sense of being protected and supported and loved and cared for, and therefore they spend less time on the anxiety of the shell and the protection, and more time letting their guard down in trusting relationships with their educators and their peers, so that the math is better, the science is better, the social studies comes across better. This is really foundational work for us. And we have people in the state who say that it's awful, that we shouldn't do it. They want to ban it, whether it's DEI. They don't want to recognize Black Lives Matter as one of the most powerful civil rights movement this country's had, and has moved the needle. These are very important things that we are big enough and visionary enough to talk about in a way that's inclusive and uplifting and doesn't suppress anyone, but actually is honest about the work. So I think it matters. The last thing I'll say is I've had to add at least one civil rights investigator, because there's so much intentional attack right now against our diverse students and our diverse communities, whether that's gay and lesbian youth, queer and questioning youth, whether that's Jewish youth who are facing a lot of impact right now, or Islamophobia as well. And I'm going to the legislature to seek 4 more civil rights investigators because there's so much more complaint and formal cases that are starting at the local level that more of them are boiling up to OSPI. So it's about being intentional with gender inclusive curriculum. It's about honoring students and respecting them, seeing themselves in the curriculum, being honest about that instruction and building peer supports. But it's also about when things don't go well, or we have communities that won't accept that as the law and willfully violate the law, there are times we do have to go in and say, here's the technical assistance to do it right. What help do you need? And if it's willfully undoing or unwilling to support kids, then we do have to have a civil rights mechanism. And my office is charged with that. And we're going to go get more staff to do that so that we close those cases faster.
Mr. Olson, do you have a response?
Yeah, one of the things that our school district does, and I would encourage school districts across the state to do, is we involve parents in the curriculum selection in our school district, and we also include students. So we want to make sure that the people that are responsible for bringing in and piloting these curriculums, it's not just teachers, but we also bring in parents and we also bring in students to be part of that curriculum assessment team. So I think if you include everyone and bring in, as he said, have a diverse group of people that are helping to select the curriculum, I think that's a win-win.
Mr. Rigdal?
And have the civil rights teams in place when it doesn't go well. We got to be on the same page. Local control matters a lot, but it can't be to the exclusion of protecting students' rights and civil rights or educators. And so there's also this commitment we have to make in every community to have a minimum set of standards that are ethical and valuable and respectful, and then make sure that we hold everyone accountable to those.
Our final set of questions before moving on to audience Q&A is regarding financing mental health in public schools.
This question is from Cora Hoyt from Vancouver iTech Preparatory. What are your plans to bridge financial gaps between thriving and underfunded schools? And how do you think resources can be modified to better suit low-income communities?
Is that for me? Do I go first on that one?
Mr. Rigdal, please answer the question.
Oh, thank
you. So this is an ongoing battle in our state. Our legislature worked really, really hard after a court case came before them, and they invested significant amounts of money between 2016 and 2019. Again, we talked about this all-day kindergarten, transportation investments. We have doubled supports for students with disabilities from 1.1 billion to 2.2 billion since I've been in office with those partnerships. We've done really amazing things with that. And then once the pandemic hit, we were asked to be dependent on more federal aid and one-time aid, did not keep up with inflation, and thus we're down $1 billion. So I think the important part about all this is while the legislature took significant actions to invest, they also at that time reduced our dependence on local property tax levies. They said there's too much of our basic ed funding being covered by levies. This is the court. The legislature said, okay, here's more state money. And then they chose to cut levies. It's okay because it's made us less dependent. In other words, it's closed the gap between wealthier communities and poorer communities with respect to basic ed instructional dollars. And then they recognize that it just costs more to live in some areas, and those teachers need to make a little more in the Puget Sound than they do in rural communities. So there's no easy answer to how much money we should have per student. I think we should get back to the concept that every school should be amply funded. So when we look at things like special education and transportation, student mental health, and a host of other things, if districts are still having to use levy funds to pay for those, it's a pretty good indication we haven't hit the mark yet. So we'll be challenging the legislature this year with $1.1 billion request in the first year of the biennium, $1.7 billion in the second year. It's a lot. It will be hard for them. They probably don't have the resource without thinking more about progressive revenue and protecting the revenue sources we have at the ballot this year. But we really have to think about our state holistically here. If you want to be the best state in academic achievement, higher education participation, student mental health and recovery and resilience, you got to invest like it. The national average in this country, if you go to the national average and you look at the 50 states, they invest 3.6% of their state economy back into their public schools. We invest barely over 3.1%. So despite being a relatively wealthy state, we're 0.5% behind the national peers. That doesn't sound like a lot. That's $3 to $4 billion more per year to support students and get less dependent on those local tax levies where wealthy communities can support it and low-income communities struggle with it. So this is a holistic question. We've made progress. We then regressed a little during periods of high inflation. We have to get every lawmaker, every community committed again to the state being the primary funder, getting up to that national average of 3.6% of GDP. It won't happen all at once, but my budget request builds the blocks to do this very effectively. And it starts to add even more progressive investments for high poverty communities through what's called a learning assistance program. Again, great program, legislature's built it. We need to go even bigger on that to drive more money in communities that need it the most.
Mr. Olson?
Yeah, thank you. Unfortunately, the state is not even close to meeting its constitutional duty of fully funding basic education, which includes special ed. And, you know, in 2019, the state spent 52% of its budget on education. Today, they're spending 43%, a 9% drop in funding on basic ed. And that's really, really a shame. They are absolutely not meeting their duty. Special education and transportation are the two biggest stressors financially on school districts across the state. And the state is not funding special ed. And so they did take away levies when they did a levy swap, a number of years ago through McCleary. But most school districts in the state are using levy money to pay for special ed. And that is not, I'm not going to go so far as say criminal, but it is against the state constitution. They need to fund special ed. School boards or school districts spending levy money on special education is straining them from being able to use that money on other areas. And that's really unfortunate. And rural school districts that can't pass levies don't have that money to pay for special education and to pay for that extra transportation that might be needed. And so I would have to say the most important thing is that we need to work with the state legislature to rework and reimagine the prototypical school funding model, because right now it's absolutely broken. They did an attempt to fix it in 2017, 2018, but it was a Band-Aid fix, and it needs to go back to the drawing board, start over, and in this time, instead of just use 4 legislatures in secret in the middle of the night, include school superintendents and teachers and school boards so that you get stakeholder buy-in on the final solution to fix funding for our schools, and not do it in a vacuum like what happened with the McCleary decision. Thank you.
Mr. Rigdal, do you have a response?
The only thing I'll add is there's also this capital budget side of the question, right? Every student and staff in the state deserves to be in healthy, safe, clean buildings, clean air, clean water that are safe. And so the other side of this equation is the investments that we have made in very bipartisan ways to invest in rural communities when they can't pass those 60% bonds. We've got clean water investments. We've got seismic retrofits. We're lifting multiple communities out of tsunami zones. So it's the operating side, which David and I agree a lot on. It's also a significantly larger share of the capital budget to make sure that students and staff are safe and healthy. That is just as important as the operating side.
Mr. Olson?
I would say that that's really important. And, the state has made some token attempts to provide more money for special ed, but when you spread it across 295 school districts, it's really just a drop in the bucket. And oftentimes the funding is inequitable and they send the money to the big rich school districts and they exclude the small rural school districts. And I think it's time for that to stop. We need to make sure that we're taking care of our small, high poverty and rural school districts.
So we have one more question before we go on to Q&A. This question is from me, Tanvi. I have a solution launched to over 800K plus students nationwide. It's called Nexus Mental Health Hub for Schools, a 24/7 common access platform point that all students can access for free to learn strategies, get peer connection, and in-person support. It's being researched by UW research psychologists as well as UW CoLab, and is an evidence-based prevention approach using the multi-tiered systems of support model. Already launched in a few districts in Washington State, what would be your thoughts on potentially expanding, implementing this trusted and accessible hub to all districts in Washington? Mr. Olson, please answer the question.
That's the easiest question we got tonight. I would be 100% in support of that. I think giving students every opportunity they can to check in and just sort of a telemed kind of thing. And this way, peer-to-peer, being able to check in with their peers across the state, across the country. I think that's a no-brainer. I'd be fully supportive of that.
Mr. Rigdal?
Yeah, concur. Again, I really appreciate you introducing to the whole audience, if they don't know the concept of the multi-tiered systems of support. We know that every student needs foundational support, whether it's academic, whether it's mental health, behavioral health, social emotional supports. And then there are students who need a little bit more. And then there are students who need a lot of support with significant interventions, again, on the academic side or the mental health side or the other. So I like that it's a multi-tiered system. I think that is very powerful. I would say what makes this successful, and the reason I think it's been innovative, and I'm grateful for you pushing this and we have districts engaging in it, is also that training side. We have a lot of young people. You all are very, very adept at reaching out to your peers through a lot of platforms. You get a lot of peer networking that didn't happen because of your access to social media tools and your connectivity. If it's not high quality training, though, that goes in that peer support, and you don't have the expertise that has been brought in from those UW experts or others, it can sometimes do more harm. Not everybody's prepared to walk a student through a significant mental health event or a significant chemical dependency risk in a short period of time. So I love the idea of multi-tiered supports, doing the professional learning that includes students as peer mentors, and teaching everyone to know when they have met their capacity and what they can offer, to make sure there's a handoff to another support system or another professional. And in some, rare cases, directly to intervention strategies to save a life, as we do with some of the systems that we built in our schools. So thank you, totally in support. It all comes down to high quality training for the adults and the students who are involved in peer models. Otherwise, sometimes we can do a little more harm than good.
Mr. Olson, do you have a response?
Yeah, I would just say an analogy would be Wikipedia. I mean, what you read on Wikipedia isn't always accurate. Anyone can go in and change it. So in this case, I would want to make sure that the people that are on the other end giving advice, maybe are they accredited? What kind of certifications or background do they have to be able to provide that peer pressure? Because I agree with Chris, that could be more harm than good. So just want to make sure that we have the back end and infrastructure to make sure it's effective.
Mr. Rigdal?
Nothing more to add. Appreciate that question, and thank you for advocating for that.
Perfect. Thank you both for all of your answers so far. They're amazing. Now we're going to add on to the session with audience questions. So I think we have a couple of audience questions in the chat, and I'm going to hand it over to Aditi and Peyton so they can take it away with that.
Our first audience question is from Theo, age 7, from Edison Elementary. What are your plans to make school lunches better? There's a lot of junk food and the healthy food is gross and kids just throw it away. Kids won't eat plain salad and need different green veggies.
Whose turn is it? Is it my turn?
Mr. Rigdal,
Oh.
please answer the question.
Okay, 7-year-old stumps the chump. I love this. This is a great question. It's one of the harder things we deal with. So on the good news side, when I got into this office, only about 300,000 students were accessing free breakfast and lunch. We know that was impactful to learning. It was impactful to behavioral health. When kids are hungry, they struggle a whole lot more. So the good news is we've built really cool systems, again, with a great legislature who has invested a lot of resources and some federal partnerships. We now have over 700,000 of our students who can access breakfast and lunch. They don't all want it, but it's accessible now. So it's a good thing as a whole. We're down to the last 300,000 students who aren't getting access, who are up the higher income ladder. The challenge is, as you indicate, while we have these really strict guidelines from the U.S. Department of Agriculture on certain grams of proteins, minimum grams of sugars, they've got to have fruits and vegetables and dairy and all of this. We've got these nice frameworks that quite frankly, if all you ever ate was a school lunch, you'd be okay, but it isn't ideal. So a couple things have got to happen here to really improve this. Number one, you got to embed healthy and nutritious concepts into the everyday learning. If you come from a family like I did that didn't have fresh fruits and vegetables, and somebody says eat a salad, the first time you eat it, you're going to toss it. If you have no idea the caloric benefits, that you can put strawberries or fruits on it to improve it. Like, there's a teaching modality to this that I needed to learn as a child of poverty. And so embedding this in our curriculums matters a lot so that students are more receptive to that. Two, we got into a bad habit for a long time in this country of processed foods because schools were underfunded. They had to sacrifice their kitchens for other things. And we bring in a lot of pre-made stuff that is simply heated up. Again, they still have to meet the agricultural guidelines on proteins and sugar limitations, but it isn't always the best. So we've got some awesome legislators who have introduced the idea of bringing back scratch cooking and fresh baked cooking. And so we're trying to reintroduce this concept. It's amazing. We have districts today serving fresh fish because it's part of their community. It's part of their culture. We've got communities bringing in fresh berries that are seasonal. Students, especially if they were a part of growing it on a school grounds or a part of it, they started to connect nutrition with their learning and their own bodies, and it's pretty powerful. Hard to scale it, but we're now kind of getting back into this place of universal meals and higher quality meals within the standards, and giving districts more grant dollars to put kitchens back in so they can make these fresh meals. Again, it'll take a while, but it's really powerful progress. And I love this question from a 7-year-old. Eat your fruits and vegetables and not just the corn dogs and the square pizza, even though it's delicious.
Mr. Olson?
Well, that's a fun question. You know, we have kitchens in our school district, and it's really nice that we have them. And then we have cooking classes where we'll have students come in and be a chef for the day. And we have all of our schools, you know, that will participate in that. And so that's one of the ways we're helping to get our students more engaged in healthy options for what they eat. And, you know, in, you know, our health classes, you know, encouraging the students, you know, to eat healthy, and the curriculum that we're teaching them as far as eating well. I know some kids only want to eat a peanut butter jelly sandwich and they don't like apples, and, you know, your taste buds change as you get older. And I agree with you. Oftentimes all the apples would end up in the trash. We have a lunch provider or a meal provider that we have a contract with, and they provide the meals. And then we do our best to try and do local sourcing. I don't know if we provide fresh fish, but, you know, depending on what school we maybe have. But I think engaging the students and allowing them to have an opportunity to go in and cook and help prepare the meals makes it more fun, and it helps educate them into making more healthy options. And then members of the school staff, school board will go in and will judge those cooking contests. So it's not only fun, but it's also educational for them. You know, we can't, you know, sometimes we have to go with what, like Chris said, what the guidelines are, what we have to provide them. And there's only so many options maybe that we can get on the local market, depending on where we live in the state. Some areas might have better access to something than others, but we do our best if we get feedback from our students in my school district to say, can you bring this back or bring that back? We try and listen to student voice a little bit on what they like to eat. We try and accommodate that as well.
Mr. Rigdal, do you have a response?
Well, I'd also say there's this secondary tier. So students who sometimes don't want to eat, they go find that vending machine. And so I would challenge students to take a leadership role, partner with your educators and your communities to also create healthier options that are vending options, avoiding the salads and the fruits and the healthier foods. To go get just Doritos and soda is not a good idea. A lot of that's been removed from schools, but that's a local decision. And inside of those vending machines, there is virtually no regulation. Sometimes students are generating the profit off of this for ASB. Let's challenge all of us to create healthier options, even in the vending side of this.
Mr. Olson?
Nothing to add, thanks.
This next question is from a student from Kenmore, Washington. How are school staff, including teachers and administrators, trained to recognize and support students experiencing mental health challenges?
Well, as we talked earlier, you know, we ask a lot of our teachers, and for the most part, they're not trained mental health professionals. And so I believe that being able to bring in the supports, being able to hire additional psychologists, extra counselors, and not put the burden solely on the teacher. Teachers need to have professional development to help them identify early signs of mental illness or, anxiety or stress. I do believe that, I know I'm going to harp on this a little bit, but eliminating cell phones and social media out of the schools will definitely help with that because we're seeing the positive benefits of that. But I think that we need to just make sure that we're giving the teachers the support they need to, especially if it means to bring in additional paraeducators, because our teachers are being asked to do so much more these days than they used to be required to do. And when I talk to them around the state, they say it's really draining on them. And we're seeing teachers with their own wellness issues dealing with what's called secondary trauma because of all the issues they're dealing with every day with all the various student types in their daily classroom. So we need to be able to have a holistic view and make sure that we're not only helping the students, but also helping the teachers so they don't become overwhelmed and help add to that problem. So I think the most important thing to start is making sure our teachers feel supported and we get them the professional development they need to be able to maybe know which student they need to go call the counselor or the psychologist to get them in front of, and maybe reach out to the parents and say, are you seeing any issues with your child? And have a collaborative effort between the parents and the counselors when that's appropriate, because there's always a possibility there could be something they're dealing with at home. So I think it's a multi-pronged approach to be able to do it effectively.
Mr. Rickdahl?
I think it's important that our educators get a baseline understanding of the risk that young people face, how they express that through anxiety, depression, and mental health distress, and sometimes much worse. There's a line, though. There's a professional learning to that. The state only funds 3 professional learning days a year for educators, which is pretty stunning. So we're going to keep trying to push on the idea that educators just need more time in these content areas to learn. But I'd also say make sure we're careful to draw that line. That's different than training them all to be intervention specialists. You really need to have licensed and specialized folks when you do use screeners and tools to help identify students who have needs. Your typical math and PE teacher and social studies and ELA teacher can be trained up to identify and refer. I would be cautious to say teachers need to be doing the work directly of mental health in their classrooms. I think that's probably too far. And so we're back to this question of fully funding our school system. So we have those counselors, those nurses, those school psychs, that we have fully funded regional mental health systems for those who need it, that we have referral networks for students who are, really up there in tier 3 and need a lot of additional support. And then, as you pointed out earlier, to make sure that there are peer networks built at school that are safe and inclusive. Everything sort of touches everything else and nothing's in isolation. The last thing I'll say is, and let's not believe that our only job is response. Let's get on the front end of this thing. Let's make sure that we're teaching students about the things in their lives that are the biggest stressors, whether that's their social media, whether that's the peer pressure that comes developmentally with them, being really, really intentional around our SEL work, so that we're training all students to not contribute to the risk of their peer or themselves. Let's not just have response systems. Let's be really intentional, as been tried to be in the last several years on the front end. In the Student Health Use Survey, they are telling us finally after several years that they're feeling a little better. There's less anxiety. They feel more connected to a trusted adult at school. Suicide rates for school-age youth in the state of Washington are down 25% since I took office here. One child is still way too many, so we have work to do. But we've gone from 70 to 74 students per year down to the low 50s. And so these interventions really matter if they have fidelity, the training is high quality, and we're persistent about it. It can't be a one and done. It's got to be consistent. Educators come and go, students come and go, stressors come and go, communities evolve. We've got to be persistent in that work. So never let go of the full funding of our schools concept. It's a real path to success here.
Mr. Olson, do you have a response?
Yeah, according to Mental Health America study, Washington State, unfortunately, ranks number 49, 48 around student mental health issues, suicide, mental health tendencies. We have great access to care, and we're like number 2 in the country around insurance coverage, yet there's a disconnect of we have this great insurance and access, but we're still not meeting the mark as far as helping our youth with mental health. And the number one reason students aren't seeking mental health is they think they can handle it themselves. And we need to make sure we're getting the information to them to know, no, you don't want to handle this on yourself. And we need to give them the support and encouragement not to try and deal with such an important issue on their own.
Mr. Rigdal?
Yeah, I would just say the states that have really tried to work hard at destigmatizing mental health are definitely identifying more students. So it looks like their case numbers are up, which they may very well be. It's a good thing to destigmatize. It's a whole nother thing to then have support systems. So those have got to be complemented together.
Our next question is from Sarah Pena, age 16, from Glacier Peak High School. Many teenagers in high school are not well informed with social and emotional fundamentals that can benefit them with their mental health. Are you planning on incorporating social emotional learning for teens in schools, and if so, how?
Mr. Rigdal, please answer this question.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely talked about this a bit. We do have learning standards in place now that are age appropriate through all of the grades. So it's exciting that we are a leading state on the concept that we're going to be intentional about this work. It ought not be an accident. It shouldn't take a student in crisis before we respond. Social emotional learning is really powerful when it's done early and developmentally appropriate, and it builds on each other. I think what's been hard for me to watch in my career in public education is the number of mandates that have been placed on both students and educators at the high school setting. More courses required, even outside of the core of math, science, ELA, social studies. Our state requires more subjects outside of that than most other states, and they're all very good things, but they take a lot of options away from students. So I think part of the question here is, are we really creating the space to do the SEL work, particularly for teens as they go through puberty, as they maturate from middle school to high school? That's a really critical time. And it's exactly the time that we tell students, these are exactly the courses you have to take and the options you have to take. So they lose the ability to maybe take a schedule that lowers their anxiety and lowers the pressure, or gives them the opportunity to take something that's a little more fun. And then the pressure, the inappropriate pressure we put on high stakes testing, and then we've mislabeled them as pass fail tests. It's got pressure on everybody. So if you're a school district thinking about pull-out programs or specialization or advisories where you're going to be intentional every day or every week on mental health issues or student supports, and then somebody says, yeah, but what about your math scores? Well, you sacrifice all of that SEL work and all those wraparound supports often to double down on the thing that's tested, even though we know that test isn't ample anymore. It isn't telling the whole story. Heck, we got almost half our kids who get a 2 on the Smarter Balance go to college and persist. And almost 25% of kids who get a 1 go to college. So it's not doing the job we thought. It's taking options away from students. So I love this question. This is a 16-year-old from Glacier Peak in Snohomish. I went to Snohomish High School, the other high school, but I still love our Glacier Peak friends. Being very honest, like there isn't enough time in our schedules and it isn't intentional enough at a time we need it the most. We should think about this holistically, and just instead of just throwing a few minutes of advisory at students, it should be systemic everywhere. And to do that, you got to carve out space in those 180 days in that 1,000 instructional hour model. We have to evaluate this and value student mental health just as much as we value quantitative reasoning or literacy skills. They really will serve students well in the long run. We can do this without sacrificing rigor or quality.
Mr. Olson?
I hate to do this to you, but can you please repeat the question?
Yes, let me just find it real quick.
Sorry.
It was, many teenagers in high school are not well informed with social and emotional fundamentals that can benefit them with their mental health. Are you planning on incorporating social emotional learning for teens in schools? And if so, how?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I agree with Chris. We talked about this earlier. The schools already have this. This is built into their curriculum. They have the legislatives that said, schools are required to do this. Teachers need to have the professional development to be able to perform the social emotional learning correctly, as we said earlier, with fidelity, that they're making sure that it's done correctly, but also making sure that the students take it serious. As I said earlier, teachers are saying that half of their high school students don't even show up for that part of class because they take that part of their week. It's a joke to them. They don't really understand that there's actually a benefit from them attending it. If these students are saying they don't know how this is going on or what social emotional learning is, I would have to say that's probably on their school, or their school district isn't um, incorporating SEL correctly, because all the students in the school district should at least some way know that they're involved with social and emotional learning. Maybe not our youngest learners, but certainly at the high school level, they should know what that is. And so I would have to do a little pushback on that school to say, why are your students feeling this way? But so yeah, I would just stick to what I said earlier about the importance of it and to make sure it's being done with fidelity.
Mr. Rickdahl, do you have a response?
Yeah, it can't be siloed, right? If it's siloed, students will find a way to come back late from lunch or come to school late, especially in high school. So it's got to be as much embedded in the classroom as possible. And that's just the best place anyways, because they've got everyday peers in that. The second part is you really do have to challenge students to take a greater responsibility with each other. Again, there are limits to that, but peer support and peer integration of the content of SEL is super important. It can't just be a talk down and lecture from an adult. And then lastly, so what are we going to do when it works to accelerate students? And what are we going to do when we identify students who need help? Those systems have to be in place too.
Mr. Olson?
Yeah, that's why I'm happy that we have school student board reps that can touch base with us on how things are going within the student body. We have our superintendent student advisories, and then we have check-ins that we go around and we ask the kids, how are you doing today? And so I think if you have multi-tiered opportunities to go and check in with your students and ask them how they're doing, that's been working well for our school district.
This next question is from Violet Hoff from Interlake High School. At my school, both of our mental health counselors left within a few years of working. What methods can we use to ensure that school licensed psychologists/therapists feel supported and stable in their profession?
Mr. Olson, please answer this question.
Yeah, thank you. That's a good question. And we sort of talked about that a little earlier. I mean, it's a tough job, and it takes a special person to be able to come in and deal with that on a daily basis, and they need to feel supported. And I think that, we do need to try and encourage people. Like in our school district, we have teacher CTE classes about being a teacher or being a welder or a carpenter. I think we need to do more to encourage our students to pursue a career in social and emotional, being a counselor, being a mental health therapist, to be involved in these careers. But we need to give our counselors the support, make sure that we're paying them well. We can't put the burden on one school counselor or psychologist for an entire 10 or 15,000 student school district. They're going to be totally overwhelmed. That's why we need the state to do more to fund special ed, and especially to help us get more counselors. As I said, I talked to a rural school superintendent earlier this week, and he said he doesn't have any counselors or psychologists on staff because he can't get them to his rural school district. So they have to rely on a third party and pay an outside entity to come in and do that work. I don't think they should have to do that, because they don't build a relationship with the student as much if you have counselors and psychologists embedded in the schools. Or if the contract goes sideways and they don't renew it, then you're struggling to backfill that. So I'd like to see more students, more people decide to move into that profession, and make sure that we pay them well so that they don't leave our schools and pursue a career somewhere else that might pay them better or give them more support. It's a tough job, and I think we can do more to try and get them even if it is bringing more special ed trained paraeducators, more counselors to help offset. But it's a complex question, and it can't just be giving any more pay. The state needs to be doing more to help us bring in more counselors in to help, so the ones we have aren't so overwhelmed.
Mr. Rigdal?
We live in a very dynamic economy in Washington State. So our young people and our mid-career adults have a lot of options, whether they're a math major who can work as a computer scientist or an engineer who can work in manufacturing, advanced manufacturing at Boeing, or whether it's somebody in the social sciences or the mental health or the clinical setting. These folks have enormous financial opportunities in other sectors within our state. So first and foremost, pay them, and pay them. We do live in a labor market that compels the public sector to step up more. We can't just ask people to do these hard jobs on altruism alone. There's some of that. There's some people who love working with students enough that they'll say, I'll forego income in a clinical setting at a hospital to be a school nurse, or I'll forego some income in private practice as a licensed mental health therapist to work in schools. But that isn't everyone. They still got to feed their families, and they gotta be able to be dignified in their work. So number one, we have to pay them. And then I'll come back to this idea that we have to start thinking differently around the role of higher education, our public institutions, as servants to the public. I mean, in what other world would we just leave it up to the free market, our essential rights and our essential functions? We don't pay a toll every block because we privatized every road. We say we all need roads, we all need infrastructure, and we've collectively paid for that, and then we collectively maintain that. But it's our collective investment. We've made choices for what is the public good, and we have to make choices that the public good is student mental health, student academic well-being, public education. And when you think about it that way, you don't just send 50,000 18-year-olds to college every year out of high school and say, go major in whatever you want. You say, go major in whatever you want, but there's such a public need for these professions that we're going to either discount or eliminate your tuition, or we're going to charge you nothing if you'll serve for 5 years or 7 years or 10 years. Or we're going to pay part of your way and do a dollar for dollar. We have to think about the public good and then task our higher education providers to deliver the public good without bankrupting them. They are amazing. We need them, but they need financial incentive, and families need incentive to encourage their youth to get into these things. It won't happen if you can get a degree and make $200,000 in the private sector or make $75,000 in a classroom. We have to be intentional. Public policy interest for the good of the public. It's a common public good. We should be helping to pay for that. The return on investment will be massive if we accelerate kids academically with great talent, and we support kids in their social emotional journey, and we protect kids when they feel vulnerable and at risk. It is our public responsibility, and we got to go beyond just reaction. We got to get out ahead of it.
Mr. Olson, do you have a response?
I would just say altruism is a wonderful thing, but it can only go so far. Once you stop loving your job and you get so stressed because you're taking on too much of a burden, altruism can only go so far. And then they could break and then want to leave. And like Chris said, then they can go pursue more money somewhere else. So we need to give them what good pay, but we also need to give them the support, their own support, to make sure that they don't feel so overwhelmed that they decide this isn't for them and maybe leave that profession altogether. So,
Mr. Rigdal?
Yeah, it's also a workload issue. So while we're talking about the compensation and the supports and trying to be early intervention and recruitment and retention, it's also about funding a basic education model. And we've both talked about this a lot, that doesn't have one counselor, or one school psych for 6,000 or 7,000 students in the middle school setting. You really have to move those ratios. Compensation is very important. Training is very important, but so is workload. You can be paid a lot of money. If you're overwhelmed from a workload standpoint, it just doesn't work. That's true of classroom teachers. It's true for our support staff, our administrators, and quite frankly, everyone in our school system.
Perfect. Thank you so much, both of you. We are now at the end of our candidate forum. Candidates, you each have 90 seconds for your closing statements. Mr. Redcall?
Thank you for hosting this. I'm very grateful. We love our student-led forums because you all are so close to it. I'm Chris Rakedal, Superintendent of Schools. I'd be very honored to have the support of everyone here, including those of you who are below voting age. We've got a great team that we have working on this campaign. I've been doing this work because I've given my whole life to public ed. I needed it to get out of childhood and to have a chance, first in my family, to ever go to college straight out of high school. As a teacher, school board member, I worked in higher ed. I served in the legislature. I'm in this role. I love the work, but it's very, very challenging. So I'm committed to fully funding and working with our legislature. I want to keep our schools public. We have got to make sure that our students are served by communities with elected school boards that are locally accountable, publicly funded, and publicly accountable. The second we privatize the system and give money to for-profit corporations and faith-based institutions, we've violated our constitutional duty. And then the last thing for me, of course, is student mental health. We've got response systems and they're getting better, but I want to get on the front end of this by changing those learning standards as we are beginning to be the first generation of educators and the first generation of young people to learn what social media is doing to them as a structured part of our learning environment. It will be just as important in the next 10 years as mathematical and quantitative reasoning skills and literacy skills in civics. Knowing the context for the world you're living in and the stressors on you and the powerful impact of misinformation and disinformation, it may or may not break our democracy if we don't do this well. And so I'm all in for this. And I think it's a massive task for all of us. So thanks for having us. I'd be honored to have your support.
Mr. Olson?
I agree. I appreciate this opportunity to talk to all of you. It's always nice to get to interact with the young folks that are actually in school on the ground and seeing it day to day in your daily lives. And have the questions come from you really means a lot to me, rather than some grown-up that doesn't really understand what you might be going through on a day-to-day basis. I've been on the school board for 11 years. Our school district has above average state test scores in reading, writing, math, and science. I'm really proud of that. Across the state right now, less than half the kids, unfortunately, on average, can read and write at grade level, and only about a third can pass their math and science. The number one goal of the public education system in our state is to get a high quality education to all of our students to make sure that they can move on post-secondary, whatever that might be, 4-year, trade, military, or right into the workforce. We need to make sure they're prepared. But we also need to make sure that we give all of our students, regardless, to make sure that they get the support that they need, whether that's mental health support, academic support, tutoring, mentoring, whatever it might be. We need to make sure that we're doing everything in our power to give every single student, every single day, the opportunity to succeed in school. And mental health is a critical piece of it. And I agree, and I've said this all across the campaign trail in the state the last 8 months, is that I fully believe that when we
Thank you so much again to our candidates for participating in NAMI Washington's OSPI Candidate Forum on Youth Behavioral Health. And thank you all for joining us this evening. It was amazing having you all, and thank you all the youth for the questions. Good night all, and have a great Friday tomorrow and a nice long weekend as well. Thank you so much.